What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Dynasty Underdog. Billy Beeman here. Got Jake Kornblum with me. Cannot believe we are mid-season already. Had some nail biters. Reminded me really how much I love Dynasty, how much I love fantasy. Super fun. But yeah, man, I can't believe we're already halfway through the season. It's crazy. We do have a segment kind of around that tonight. But before we get into the content and the sheet here, how you doing, Jake?
Doing well, man. I beat one of my least favorite league mates in my 20 plus leagues this
Least
week, but
favorite league mates. I love that.
by a little over a point. I don't know if there's a better way to beat someone except for just absolutely demolishing them. There's no in between. It's the 10-point win is but the decimal point win is usually oh yeah, fuck you. You probably thought if I would have made one other decision, I would have beaten you. But then the absolute blowout, I think, feels even better. But it's aside from the point. I was just so happy to beat this guy because he is just so fucking annoying. He's literally one of the least. He's the guy, I think I've told you about it. He's the guy who, for whatever reason, decides to say that he's interested in 90% of my team. And then every time I try and make a trade with him, he's unwilling to make a trade. And then he's the same dude who I sent an absolute smash accept because my team was in a terrible position. I think it was Daniel Jones, Chase Brown, and a first for Drake May. And he was like, no, that's too much. And I was like, oh,
No
if that's too
counter,
much,
man.
then we're done here. there's just no working with you, my man. So yeah,
Oh
no,
man.
it's a fun world. But yeah, no, I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. How about
Yeah,
you?
yeah. We all have that one league mate. Very, very challenging. But I did have a couple wins this week by 2 points. It's probably the best feeling winning by that much and the worst feeling losing by that much. There's really not much that rivals that. You wake up in the morning and you're just if you fell asleep or whatever, you couldn't watch the game, you wake up and you're just whoa, you gotta be kidding me. I lost that by 0.5. You're just insane. And I won also a league with some special stuff. I got the highest score in that league by 2 points. It's just, it's game of inches and it kind of travels right over to the fantasy side of things sometimes. So it's a great time of year, really cool. And you can kind of now's the time where you're navigating, looking around, seeing what the schedule looks like the rest of the season. Can I really gain the wins I need to at the end of the year here? And you can kind of pick and choose where you need to kind of give up, where you need to really push the chips in. I think our second segment kind of might get into that topic a little bit, but all right, let's get it going here. We had the NFL trade deadline today, really burying the lead here. So we did have a couple of notes here from that worth discussing. Really, just two, I guess, and then one that just kind of popped up today in the news cycle. But let's get going here with Jakobi Meyers to Jacksonville. We have Travis Hunter on IR. We could talk through both of those things. We haven't really got to talk about the Travis Hunter injury and all the things that surround that, but clearly they're bringing in some wide receiver help with Brian Thomas Jr. not really playing up to par. Also an injury as well this past week. Jakobi Meyers to Jacksonville. I think this is better for Meyers, in terms of point scoring, and probably gives you a little window to get out on him if you want to. So I think it's good all around for all purposes of consuming Jakobi Meyers in a dynasty league, points or value. Any thoughts there, Jake?
Yeah, I think just historical relevance is always helpful. More often than not, these types of midseason trades don't happen to be as successful or as fruitful as we want them to be for the individual player. That being said, they do typically land well for the team. So Jakobi Meyers is going to take away some type of approach schematically for defenses to cover him no matter what. You can say whatever you want about him as an individual talent, especially in the dynasty space. But I think more importantly, from an NFL perspective, he's incredibly talented, and defenses are going to have to scheme up to defend him. I don't think that from a fantasy perspective, I'm super bought in there. But that being said, this does feel like a great end of season rental situation. Get in on a veteran. It is a relatively young wide receiver room. And this is a good way to kind of add a little bit more depth as well, while Travis Hunter thankfully didn't have a series of a knee injury as everyone thought, as it was a non-contact in practice injury that pushed him directly onto IR. So I think like initial thoughts were, holy shit, this guy is going to be torched. Instead, he ends up having relatively positive news, and there's a potential window for Travis Hunter to come back towards the end of the year. So all in all, I think it's positive news for the Jaguars. Don't necessarily know if it's positive news for Jacoby Myers. What about you?
Yeah, I think the last note here is more on Hunter. I think that there's probably a window here to get in on Travis Hunter, because a lot of the narrative going around is also, look, he plays both ways, high, increased chance of injury, right? We're seeing it live. Now they add Jacoby Myers. And then I think you get into, 2 weeks into this IR stint, and people are probably just like, all right, I'll get out. I'm contending. Take this guy. He's injury prone, all that stuff. He plays both ways. I don't know how much his usage is going to be on offense. So for me, I'd probably let it breathe a week or so here. And then I would try to send some low-ish ball offers out for Travis Hunter. I think it's probably the most actionable news here. I'm not buying Jacoby Myers for any reason. I mean, if somebody wants to sell you him for like a second straight or something, and you can get like just like a nice easy deal out of it, and you need some depth on a really strong contender, I'm not going to hate on that, but I'm just really not seeking him out. I'd probably be looking to sell and get almost double of what I just quoted.
Makes sense.
Cool. All right. Real quick here, YouTube comments. Kevin, good evening from Lakeland, Florida. Shout out, Florida. Homegrown, both of us. All right. So next year we'll stick with the trades. Rashid Shaheed. I really struggle with that name. To the Seahawks. I mean, it's probably a good move for the Seahawks. That actually seems like a good fit there. Do you think this impacts Torrey Horton in a negative way, or do you think that they don't really play similar roles? How do you feel about that? Because the wide receiver core is pretty thin as is, right? It's really just been all JSN. I don't think this changes that much. I mean, this is a guy who is looking at like 3 to 5 targets a game, maybe sometimes a little bit more than that. Maybe on this team he gets more than that, but plays a pretty specific role. I don't know. How do you feel about this impact?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think that this was the first week that we've really seen Torrey Horton's role kind of expand and how he can actually impact the offense. He was kind of schemed up in a few different ways. There was a little bit of verticality to his game. I don't think that that's necessarily his game. I think that is what Rashid Shaheed is brought in for. He's going to be a vertical threat no matter what. People make fun of cardio Cade Otton. If Rashid Shaheed is literally like the cardio king, right? Like, dude's on the field for close to 85 to 90% of snaps. And what is he doing? He's running typically in a straight line or some type of post, some type of deep outbreaking route. That's what he's there for. I think he is what they dreamed of basically MVS being last year when the organization brought him in. There's a need for having vertical runners, and that's what Rashid Shaheed does. I don't think he actually really impacts Torrey Horton all that much. Really, he's just going to be taking away snaps, I think, more importantly, from Cody White. Is that his name? Yeah. And Ricky White from being on the field. So, yeah.
Cody and Ricky. Okay. Yeah, that's probably a good read on the situation. Okay. Yeah, I guess there's not too much dynasty impact there. Obviously, like all these guys, Shaheed's a perfect example of a guy who I'd probably be searching to move on from and see if anybody is interested in a guy like that for a second or something like that, because you probably weren't getting that for Shaheed, a couple weeks ago, and you probably won't be getting it long term. So it's worth making a move on. Okay, last bit of news here that came up. Really interesting one, I think, honestly. Jacoby Brissett has been named the starter again. I also saw a report coming out that maybe they were trying to give extra time for the foot to heal for Kyler. So I don't know if this was like a straight bench. I can't tell what this is. Truthfully, seems like they benched Kyler. But that's not really what everything, all the kind of, if you're reading the tea leaves, it doesn't necessarily seem like that though. So I don't know. How do you read the situation, Jake?
Yeah, I don't. I'm the type of person who doesn't try and read situations, honestly. Like, I think that this is a perfect time to go buy Kyler. It's an opportunity for everyone else to read the situation and think that there's more here than there should be. The contract is just too goddamn big for them to just give it up. The money is basically locked in. Jacoby Brissett, yes, is playing in a way where the offense looks a little bit better. They played against a really bad Dallas defense. Yes, Dallas, we didn't talk about it, but Dallas did add some additional bodies moving forward, but they didn't play last night, so it doesn't really matter for the conversation's purposes. So it's like, yeah, Jacoby Brissett, who we know what he is. He is a known quantity, a known entity that occasionally has a window of games where he looks, competent. I don't want to be a dickhead, but like that's really what he's done in his career. He has a couple of starts where he's like, oh, okay, maybe Jacoby could be a starter. And then he becomes a starter. And it's like, oh, nope, Jacoby's Jacoby. And that's what's going to happen again. Like, I'm not here to play the game of, oh, Jacoby Brissett finally figured it out in year 14 in the NFL. Like that's just what the fuck are we doing? And I don't think that's what's happening in Arizona either. This is kind of going hand in hand with the Brock Purdy conversations. And I've had a few different conversations within the Superflex Super Show Discord and server. Shout out to them, and our own Dynasty Underdog Discord server. Shout out to us. But feel free to join in the description on both this video and on the Apple Podcast and Spotify podcast fronts. But
Professional plug.
I did want to just say openly that the conversation has been about foot injuries. And I do think that foot injuries are these things that we, one, don't really give enough credit to. And by credit, I mean like they are pervasive. They stay around. When you come back too fast, they continue with you. We're talking about Malik Neighbors having a toe injury that he's potentially had since high school. Like, we go through these windows, and I do think that there is a circumstance where Arizona is just trying to play the conservative card that happens to also align relatively well with them playing slightly better football while their starting quarterback isn't there. So they don't have to rush him back. Like, maybe it is a quote unquote benching, but I just don't think it's a long-term situation that is going to have any legs. And that's kind of where I sit. What about you?
And even if it is, like, Kyler's the kind of player who's going to get another shot somewhere. So I agree with Jake. This is one you can't wait on that long. You probably wait maybe 2 weeks or so and just, really try to get him low, because I do think that there's a window here where you can get him for far less than a first. And if you're doing that with Kyler, like that's you have to invest in that. And you're going to be, most of the time you're going to get the return on investment. It's going to bounce back, and at the price, you're not going to be that disappointed if it really goes south. And I don't think I agree with Jake here. I think over time we're going to see Kyler coming back, and it's just them being conservative with the injury. Those foot injuries are really, really tough to come back from. And this is also a guy who uses his feet pretty much every play. This isn't Brissett who's standing back there in the pocket, though he had a rushing touchdown last week. But yeah. That's neither here nor there. Good stuff, Jake. Okay, good breakdown. All right, so we're going to hop into our first main segment here, midseason check-in, surpassing expectations. I'm going to let Jake take it away here to run through each of the positions, but I think we have some good candidates here for this segment. Feel free to say any intro that you feel is needed here, Jake.
Yeah, sure. I'll just kind of push this out there as we constantly go through these types of exercises between Billy, myself, and Uriah, kind of in our own private chat, sometimes over text message. And really all this is just kind of a look into a little bit of the exercise of kind of what did we miss? And I wanted to kind of expose that to our listeners, just to kind of give a little bit of feedback about what we're doing wrong, what we didn't see. Maybe there are just such egregious gaps in value for certain profiles that we should have been getting into at an earlier point. And, kind of what are we doing to rectify that or correct that moving forward? And so I want to break down this conversation into all four major positions. We'll go from quarterback, running back, wide receiver into tight ends. And then for each of them, we have basically 2 shout outs and then a dishonorable mention, meaning probably someone that we were looking to get into during the offseason that has unfortunately gone the opposite direction of what we were expecting by midseason. And maybe there's a place for them to potentially be acquired or go in a different direction now. So with further ado, I'll start off with quarterbacks just to kick it off. We have Drake May. And what I'll do for each individual player is I'm going to provide their KTC positional ranking as of August 1st and then as of today, as well as provide trades that were happening in Dynasty Daddy's trade database on 8/1 versus trades that are happening today. Some of the trades are really just trying to go after like what felt like a market value of that time. I was really trying to go with what was easiest to read out as well. So these aren't going to be overly complicated. I think the most amount of assets in a specific trade I put in was 4, just to try and get flat market values. Just a heads up. With Drake May on August 1st, he was QB7. He is currently QB3 on KTC. That was giving him on August 1st the value of around Stafford, the 2025 105, which you could probably say was around Cam Ward value. So Stafford, let's say, plus Cam Ward plus Roshan Johnson for Drake May straight up. Or at the time, it was Drake May plus a first for Joe Burrow. I think give or take, that feels about right. The 105 plus Stafford and Roshan for Burrow around that period of time for Burrow feels probably a little undervalued, but give or take, this was the generalized value for Drake May. And then additionally, right now, he's going for about Michael Penix plus 2 firsts. So pushing this conversation kind of openly without me giving too much of my own feedback right off the bat, like, where was Drake May kind of like in your process? Was he someone that you were looking to acquire at QB7? And was that price point at or on August 1st palatable for you? And like, is that something that you were willing to send out and getting off of Burrow or getting off of Stafford in the 105 a way to get into May? And then dive into also kind of his now value.
Yeah, I mean, I was probably a little more apprehensive, to be honest. I don't think I had QB3 in mind. So, yeah, I mean, there was spots where I was interested in getting in on him. I mean, during rookie season, so 2 months prior, really, or a couple, maybe even more than that, a couple months prior, I think it was easier to get in on him, obviously. But, yeah, I mean, I would have probably done the Stafford type deal for May if that was available. I did find it hard in general to get into him, and I still find it very difficult to get into him, which makes sense. I mean, he's on the rise. Depending on where those firsts are, I think Penix and 2 firsts is not that bad, honestly, to get in there. I've been taking my shot with Cam Ward in a first and something else, like not just that, but just kind of package deal there. Seeing if I could swing something like that, which obviously is undervalued, but seeing if I can still get somebody to buy in on, a young quarterback in a first type thing. So, I mean, I would like to get in on him. I think you can still try to. There's obviously not too much room for him to grow from here, though. I still think there is a little bit, but not much. Similar to kind of Jaden Daniels. So I would if I'm getting out, I would be looking for making sure those firsts are early. And I mean, Penix isn't that bad of an asset. I'd like something a little more sustainable personally.
Yeah, I think that's really good feedback, and it means even more coming out of Billy's mouth, considering that he's a Patriots fan. But I think, like, for
that's
me,
part of why I was apprehensive too, to be honest, because like seeing him on another team, I may have been more willing to be like, oh, this guy looks like he might, step it up and be legit. Like, let me get in. But I'm a fan of my own team, and I'm like, I've seen the story before, probably not going to work out. You know what I mean? That kind of thing, where it's like, do I really want to buy in on this and be like, wow, I made a mistake because I'm a fan and I just paid extra for him, kind of thing. Sorry to cut you off, but that was part of it.
No. No, that's great. And just going into my own feedback here, I think talking about Drake May at QB7 on August 1st, given what he did his rookie year, was really hard for me to swallow. I thought honestly QB7 at that point in time was just way over the skis without him having significant enough performance. And if we look at just the top 10 quarterbacks right now in KTC, we're talking about Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson being the two quarterbacks above him. Jaden Daniels being a QB4, Mahomes QB5, Jalen Hurts QB6, Justin Herbert QB7, Joe Burrow QB8. And ridiculously enough, Jackson Dart QB9, Bo Nix QB10. I do think that there are still probably 7 quarterbacks that are better than Drake May from a scoring perspective. And so,
yeah, that's fair.
QB3, I think, is pretty ridiculous. I do think that this is a prime example of a conversation we were talking about a few weeks ago, when to get off of quarterbacks. And we talked about
Jaden Daniel
it actually.
Conversation.
Exactly. And we talked about Drake May. I brought him up. The time was then, the time is now. If there is a way for you to get into a similar scoring asset to Drake May that you know is a stable commodity in Dynasty Fantasy Football, you do that and you get the plus on top of them because he's currently QB3 in the market. What does that mean? That it's possible in every single micro market? No. But if you are playing in a standard 12-team Superflex league, I do think that there is probably an out because Drake May is a very, very hot commodity.
Yeah. Do you go Herbert plus a first or something? Can you get that kind of deal, or like a couple seconds, or a really valuable producer? So, you know what I mean? Like, you may be able to do that kind of thing just on market value alone. If somebody's just like, wow, I'm getting in on the QB1, thinking about Drake May that way or something.
Yeah, and just really quickly, so that we don't take up too much time with this, and I know we probably will because that's just who Billy and I are. To your point about Herbert, I think wait a couple of weeks. Rashawn Slater hasn't been there all year. Joe Alt just got injured again for the rest of the season. Yes, they traded for Taylor Penning, but at the end of Tyler, one or the other.
Tyler Penning.
Tyler Penning sounds more accurate, but it's neither here nor there. A boo-boo outside tackle who didn't live up to his exact expectations, but will slot in probably totally fine. But the whole point is that the offensive line is battered and bruised. I do expect Herbert's production to probably slow down a little bit over the next coming weeks. And maybe that's a great time to Billy's point,
Trevor Penning.
I always hate Trevor's. And so we add that first on top of someone like Herbert after he has a quote unquote decline of a few games, and you can get into Herbert now plus a first. And who knows, like if you can add a future first far enough, that first can easily creep up into, mid or even early, even if you're sending that asset to a contender. So something to be mindful of. I think as we jump into the next player, this is kind of where we're starting to see some of the drasticness, right? We're talking about players that I think were not forgotten about, but maybe just not given enough credit, especially because of the positions that they were playing. And we're still talking about quarterback. So Jackson Dart on 8-1, he was QB 23. As of right now, he's QB 9. Mm-hmm. On 8-1, you were able to trade basically a random second. You were also able to add, and this is why I added the second one, because I thought a random second seemed a little odd, but you could do golden plus a second. So that's in my mind about 2 seconds. Or you could send, at the time, Dart plus 2 firsts for Caleb Williams. And I added this one because, one, I thought that was actually probably pretty accurate. And 2, that's just, in my opinion, that's a really great process trade. So you get the 2 random firsts. Yes, Caleb Williams was the 101. I get it. But to the idea that you are getting a potential starting quarterback in Jackson Dart. Yes, he wasn't going to start the year as of 8-1. We knew that, but he was a first-round quarterback selection, and we knew that the Giants were going to start him at some point this year, ideally as a Giants fan, later on in the year, meaning the year was a little bit more successful. But we are now at a place and point in time where that kind of trade looks incredibly intelligent, because you knew that you were getting in on an asset that at any point in time would probably appreciate to, at bare minimum, a first plus. So you're talking about 3 firsts for Caleb Williams without him actually performing in year 2. It's a great way to get out of what you were basically giving up the 101 for the year prior. I think that that's a really great process trade. Whether or not you end up winning that trade or not is not really kind of the point of this conversation, but just something to keep in mind. Additionally, in the now trades, you can trade Dart straight up for Ted Aroa, or Rome Odunze. And I ask you, What are we doing with Jackson Dart?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the situation, personally, I mean, you know, because I talked to you about this last couple days. I traded Jackson Dart away. I think you can get even better than those returns if you add to Jackson Dart. You can really get up into the elite tier of other positions. So, I mean, personally, I'm trading Jackson Dart, but I think that we were all kind of in on buy Jackson Dart back in drafts and probably in August too. We were saying get in on this guy. Like, these guys should be worth a first. So if you can get him for less than a first, get in there. And so this tracks with kind of, I think, what we saw. But yeah, now it's, he's a little rich for my blood. I'm not 100% sure he's going to maintain this kind of value. I think people value him even higher than that, probably, in their own minds in certain situations, is giving his rushing upside and what could be when the, players get healthy around him in the future. So yeah, I think this is kind of on the money. I wouldn't trade him straight up necessarily for McMillan or Odunze or anything like that. I'd be looking for stuff back. I mean, you have to sell this as it's a quarterback who is Josh Allen-esque. Like, that should be your pitch kind of thing. And so I think you should be getting in return something a little bit higher. You should get more points per game, I should say, in return than those kind of guys. So, I would be looking for different returns, but I am on the selling side, I think, of Jackson Dart.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the reason I put these two guys there, and like I said, I was trying to keep the assets relatively low for these trades. So I got a lot of 1-for-1s available in the trade database. What I will say is the reason I included these is because I think that there actually still is a window to get into Jackson Dart. I think that even though there might be a lot of acclaim in one direction, I do think that, to Timothy's point in the comments, he's been producing at an elite level from a fantasy production perspective, even considering how poor the environment is around him. You're talking about basically a wide receiver room, a tight end who looks just like early career Evan Ingram in terms of number of drops he has per game, Darius Slayton, who's faking concussions because he drops a touchdown. Like, it's bad, right? And his star running back, quote unquote, from a production standpoint, also ends up just absolutely shattering his entire ankle. So the dude is still performing. He's still scoring points at a relatively elite clip. And I think if you can get into him now for those types of prices, it's still worth it to me. It is pretty incredible to think about what you were able to get into him before. And yes, to Billy's point, we were shouting out from the tops of our, I don't even know what the saying is because I fucked it up.
Mountains.
But thank you. Yeah, sure. Mountains. There we go. We're shouting from the top of our mountains, basically, that if he's sitting there at the top of the second or even late first in your rookie drafts, there's no reason for you not to smash select. I don't care what your opinion is about the wide receivers or tight ends around him. He's just the asset that I would be choosing, even over Tyler Warren. I still feel that way now. It's just one of those things that I think you just have to go for the quarterback every single time. And sometimes it doesn't pan out. Sometimes it looks like Cam Ward's rookie year. I'm fully conscientious of that. But it's about the opportunity at hand. And I think the opportunity was there for Jackson Dart. And the opportunity will be there again in the offseason. And that was kind of the perspective. Jumping lastly into the dishonorable mentions, I did want to shout out Geno Smith. He was definitely someone that I was pushing for just at cost as a good QB3 to get into. What I will say, and something that I posted in the Discord today, is that Geno Smith unfortunately lives with this reality of his star tight end not being present, unfortunately, for him this season. In standard scoring formats, we're talking about 4 point per touchdown, 1 or 2 point or negative point per interception, 25 yards per point for passing yardage. Geno Smith in the first 3 games had an 18-point game, a 3-point game, yes, and a 26-point game. Then Brock Bowers gets injured. And then he scored 26 points again when Brock Bowers came back. all of this to say, yeah, I do think that opposition and scheduling matters, but also I think that when you take out his most talented receiving option, he's going to plummet in terms of value. His performance is also going to decline. The fact that they haven't benched him, I think, is a good indictment. His contract is a good indictment of what his value is going to be. And at QB 36, I just don't see why you wouldn't want to get in on Geno Smith, even if you think he's absolutely dog shit. Like, I don't think he's particularly good. But at QB 36, I'm throwing around, let's see, I'm throwing around Anthony Richardson. Shador Sanders is sitting there. Dylan Gabriel, Jalen Milroe, Joe Flacco is right next to him. Like, there are ways, in my opinion, to get into something a bit further along in their career and will have a little bit longer longevity that I also think will probably reclaim some of that dynasty value that people are so scared off of for the rest of the season. But, I'm just not that scared off by the asset, especially seeing what he looked like again this past week. What about you?
Yeah, I think you broke it down really well. I agree pretty much wholeheartedly with everything you said there. We've seen this story before with Gino. His his value, excuse me, his value plummeting and then coming back. Even when he went to Vegas initially, like there wasn't really much hype, and then his value kind of increased, and then now it's gone down, and it's going to increase again as long as Brock Powers is there, most likely. So yeah, if you can get into him at this price, I'm totally on board with you. Timothy says Brady's preoccupied with cloning dogs to bench Gino. maybe, maybe.
Did
All
you see
right,
that
let's move.
article?
Yes, I did. I
Okay.
did.
Okay.
It's insane. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's not even worth the conversation.
No,
Anyway,
no.
I'm just glad that his dogs are living in his family still, whether it's the first
Listen,
generation or the
whatever it
15th.
takes. All right. Like the 30th copy of his dog. Jesus Christ.
He can't get rid of his best friend. I got it, but can't keep his wife.
Listen,
Anyway,
lifestyle of the
on
rich and the famous, bro. Come on.
on to running backs. We got Javonte Williams sitting there on August 1st at RB17. He is now running back 17. Did I say
No, no,
17 both
you
times?
said that twice. Yeah.
47. Sorry. Running back
On August 1st.
47
Yeah.
on August 1st. He is now running
You
back
were so
17
shocked by
today.
the running back 17. You said it twice. You're like,
I
what?
am honest. I can't believe he's running back 17. It's insane. And what that means is on August 1st, you were able to acquire him at a clip of Rashid Shaheed, straight up, or you add a third and you could have gotten him for a second, which in theory is also probably relatively good value looking back at what he's going for now, which is about a random first or AJ Brown. Where's your head at?
That's insane. People have been trying to get a first off me in a league where I'm contending for like 2 weeks, and I'm sure they're trying to do that everywhere. So obviously that's the heady play. If you can do it personally, I don't buy this being sustainable. I mean, we just saw this week. Any week where they're not just like ahead or really firing on all cylinders offensively, he could easily have a sub 10-point game and just be useless to you. So no, I'm not trading a first for Javonte Williams. Like, I'm just not doing it. I will trade you stuff, like maybe some seconds. Maybe I'll do that to get into him because he can have a great week or a couple great weeks, and he can be like, he certainly could be a league winner. Don't get me wrong. It's just like he could totally not be a league winner too. So I'm not going to invest that much capital into a guy like him. We shouldn't be that surprised by this. We should have been more in on buying him when we knew that he was going to be on the Cowboys and they weren't going to have many other options. Like, he was easily the best option there, especially for what they wanted to do. So I think we could have personally, I will speak for myself, I could have been more into that profile, even though I don't love the player. And that's something that, a lot of dynasty managers need to get, the hurdle they need to get over sometimes.
Definitely. I think that's really some of the takeaways here, especially for me, is just there are profiles that are just too good to just give up on at their available price. And we're talking about relatively like the value is incidental, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's so movable that it's not that concerning for me. And that's really kind of like where I want to keep this conversation. So just really quickly, I completely agree with everything that Billy said. This was very much a miss on my own process's part. Even though I wasn't a Javonte fan, I gave up on him. I do think that being able to get into him for Rashid Shaheed is just an absolute necessity. Even if he lost the running back room on, week 3 to Jaden Blue, like, so be it. But the funny thing is, that's the type of process that we should be doing. Billy and I had a lot of criticism against Jaden Blue, had a lot of criticism against Miles Sanders. There is a specific place in which this team needs to run the ball no matter what. And if the offense is operating at an efficient level, the running back will have some type of access to gaining points. And, being able to be on a team that moves the ball down the field, gets anywhere within the red zone, automatically gives you an opportunity to score touchdowns. That's really what Javonte is banking off of in terms of his value. And when he scores touchdowns, he's a 10-plus point per game running back. Awesome. When he doesn't, they'll probably be somewhere in the mid 6 to 7.5 range because he's not really catching that many balls out of the backfield. And he's usually averaging somewhere between like the 50 to 65 yard range. It makes sense. Like, it really does. So when you break it down like that, it's just like, just be conscientious of it. Here's another running back that I think I got bogged down by my own process, even though there are other voices in the community that were definitely much higher on. And I just completely moved myself away, even though there was a perfect buy opportunity. That'd be Quinshon Judkins. Quinshon Judkins sitting at running back 21 on August 1st due to his legal issues. Then sitting at RB8 right now. We're talking about trades like RJ Harvey plus Cooper Kupp on 8-1, or Jarquez Hunter, Woody Marks, Bashal Tootin, 3 dart throws for a running back that we know has the pedigree, has the draft capital, but had legal issues attached to his name. All three of those trades both of those trades that I just said are, in my opinion, not even retrospectively, but at the time, also smashes. I just unfortunately didn't own majority of the assets here. But the general idea is, like, you could have probably gotten into him for 2 seconds, give or take, and pretty easily gone into Quinshon Judkins. Now you're able to still get into him for a Michael Pittman plus Javonte. That does probably sit there at like a first plus an early second if I had to give that value. Or you can add a first to Quinshon Judkins and get into CMC, or get out of CMC and get into Judkins plus a first. That latter trade just sounds like an absolute smash, but like, I don't know what that person's doing, but regardless, Quinshon Judkins is the prime example of, yes, I didn't love the profile, but there was times to get into this, what I thought was a flawed profile due to the legal issues, at a significantly more palatable cost, and I should have done so.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to the situation in general, we were not fans of Quinshon Judkins from a film perspective, for sure. Also, I would say that at least Uriah and myself, I think, were a little bit more concerned about the legal issues. You were too, for sure, but you were more willing to get in, I think, at some of the prices. But I would say, on a whole, we were kind of like, yeah, maybe not. But it's like, not to be insensitive to the situation, obviously, but like, too often we see these not pan out in the player being suffering some kind of significant punishment, I should say, right? The player doesn't often suffer a significant punishment in this situation, and usually comes back to the team, especially when they're viewed as highly talented. Whether we view it or not, the team viewed this guy as a very, very talented player, right? And so with those guys, it's there's another situation that this reminds me of, but in general, it's kind of CMC, but not for legal reasons, right? It's like CMC because we're like, oh, the injuries, but it's like, if they're that good of a player, and not that we knew Judkins was that good, but if their potential is that high and the teams view it that way, then obviously these are all in a spectrum of sorts. He's not at the CMC spectrum by any means, but he's at a spectrum enough where I should have been like, yeah, let me buy into this profile. end of story, and reap the rewards, when he comes back inevitably. And so probably should have been able to see that. And I think in the future, be a little bit more aggressive in these situations personally, for me in acquiring.
Definitely. Definitely. I completely agree there. Lastly, dishonorable mention, we got Alvin Kamara sitting there at running back 22 on August 1st. He's now sitting there at running back 42. So when I say running back 42, that sounds crazy, right? What is sitting there at running back 42, man? Like, that is straight up Kamani Vidal, Braylon Allen, Tyler Algier, Brashard Smith, Ramondre Stevenson. Are you trading any of those guys straight up right now for Alvin Kamara? Is Kamara just done in your eyes?
It's not so much that he's done. I think if he had a competitive team around him, or if he was on a competitive team, that he'd score fantasy points. But he's not on a team that can utilize his skill set right now. And so, yeah, I'm not buying him. That's for sure. And he doesn't want to move. He's 30 years old now, and he doesn't want to leave the team. He said, like, I'm going to just retire. Like, I'll just walk away if you guys trade me, or if I can't play here. So, in my mind, like, he does become kind of a dead asset when it comes to that situation. Is there a chance during the offseason that you can get him for like literally nothing? Like, maybe I'll be in at that point on like acquiring some Kamara, because maybe his mind changes. Maybe he can make a couple million and go over to a contender or something like that. That could happen. But I have no interest in trying to buy into him thinking he's going to come back and perform this season at all. So yeah, I actually have a trade on here at the end of the show we'll talk about with Kamara, that happened last week before he shit the bed this week, really. But yeah, no interest in Kamara. I don't think anybody on this pod was super interested in Kamara either necessarily. I think there was probably times where maybe we were like, yeah, you can get in on late-ish Kamara, but I don't think we were ever really like, go get Alvin Kamara. I think we kind of saw the situation for what it was.
Yeah, he was a great example. I did this a couple of times. I just used him as almost like a random throw-in as a late second into a trade, and then I just immediately traded him, 1 to 2 weeks later in the offseason for a second plus, usually a second plus 2/3 or something along those lines. And it's just like, he has the name and the pedigree that I think people want those available points. The unfortunate reality is just getting into that offense and not knowing what that was going to look like with Kellen Moore, how he uses running backs in particular. It just didn't give me a lot of faith that Alvin Kamara was the right running back for that offense. So, yeah. Jumping into wide receivers, we have 3 really interesting ones, in my opinion. The first one for me was George Pickens going to Dallas. He was sitting at wide receiver 24 on KTC on August 1st. He's now at wide receiver 17, which is a nice little jump. You were able to acquire him basically straight up for Tyrone Tracy on 8-1, Chuba Hubbard, or Najee Harris plus a 3rd and 4th. I think all 3 of those values, looking back in retrospect, were just kind of ridiculous in terms of where we were valuing George Pickens. And right now, you can get out of George Pickens for Travis Hunter, given his injury news, Devontae Smith, which I think is probably relatively similar-ish asset, maybe with a little bit lower touchdown upside, or First Plus, which was basically impossible at the time. You're talking about, like we were just saying, he was going for a second, a little bit of second plus, something like that. So yeah, where's your take on George Pickens? Why was the market so down on him? Why could he not move?
Yeah, and the market's down on him because of who he is. He's a dumbass. Like we saw it this week, right? Like he can't help himself, but he just can't help himself. I mean, I guess you could stop there. He just can't help himself, and that's just who he is, And I think because of that, there's a stigma with that. He got traded from Pittsburgh. That's a pretty stable place. Can really develop wide receivers. If they're like, get out of here, then some people are just going to be like, maybe this guy isn't the one, but the situation was too good. I think, to me, I didn't see those prices really ever for Pickens. I never really saw like I can sell Tracy and get Pickens. I would have done that. Now I would like to get out of him for Hunter or First Plus. I'm not really interested in going like lateral necessarily from a Pickens because he is solid. And, he obviously on this team on Dallas, he has a ton of upside, especially if CD goes down or anything like that. Like the contingent upside's crazy. So I see the value in him for sure. I think some of the outs right now are really solid though. So I would be trying to get in there.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is one of those situations where the value is just too good to not get in on 8-1, and now the value is too good to stay in my opinion. There's just too many ways for us to kind of maneuver around George Pickens, and this is probably the best time to try and sell out. I know there were a lot of conversations before CD Lamb came back that we should be selling now. That might actually be the case. I didn't decide to look back about 2 weeks ago when CD Lamb was coming back and what George Pickens like ceiling value looked like, but that's not really the point of this exercise.
Yeah, real quick here. I don't know what this is. Is this referring to the Cowboys? What happened to the true culture of our beloved team? There's no one saying we want championships and legacies. I'm sorry. I just was laughing at that. I'm not sure what that's necessarily in reference to, but shout out to the YouTube comments.
Yeah, shout out to Rudolph Mack Jr. There we go. Next would be Michael Pittman, who is having, a traditional Michael Pittman year on 8-1. We're talking about wide receiver 48. Right now, wide receiver 29, 8-1 trades. We're talking about Pop Douglas in a third, so basically a third, or David Njoku.
Why did you do that to Pop?
He didn't deserve that. He just lost his uncle, I believe it was, and
he just went off too.
Yeah,
4 for 4, big touchdown.
Good for him. The now trades for Michael Pittman, basically getting a first or Addison plus. Where's your head at with Michael Pittman and kind of what went wrong with the way we were looking at the Colts situation?
It's not even, I don't even think it was how we were looking at the Colts situation. I'll speak for myself personally. This is very similar to the Javonte Williams situation, or I don't know if I said situation twice, but it's very similar to that in terms of a player that I didn't really like. We should know that he's going to have to be involved. It's not like they have a ton of options here. They don't love AD Mitchell. He wasn't about to just one-to-one replace him. They actually just sent his ass over to the Jets to irrelevancy. So, Michael Pittman, we should have just known that this guy was going to be highly involved, and that last year was nearly all related to his injuries. He had very significant injuries last year, and we don't love Michael Pittman as a wide receiver one guy, but honestly, he really isn't that necessarily, but he is like a top end wide receiver too, right? And he's gonna give you those points, and he's gonna be there. He's reliable. So we should have just kind of known that. And I mean, I personally don't mind getting out of him for 26 first plus Addison plus. I don't hate those trades. I would probably do something like that. But certainly was just the same situation. I didn't like this guy. I didn't give him his due credit and just get in low so I could sell high. If you don't like a guy, you don't have to keep him. You can just get in low and sell high and be like, oh, wow, look, I got out of a guy for more than I should have, and I don't even like him. And that feels better a lot of the time. So you need to seek out those situations and really attack them a little more aggressively.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have much to add except for I did add him in Scott Fishbowl this year, and he's honestly been just absolutely incredible. We're talking about wide receiver 6 in that format because of the number of receptions he's received. And, that is one of those things where you just have to look at your actual platform, the scoring settings in that individual league, and understand what are the best ways to fully take advantage of the league itself. And I think he's just one of those prime examples that if you are playing in a PPR league, I do think that there's just a lot of upside to Michael Pittman. He unfortunately, I just don't think has a lot of dynasty value in the grand scheme of things. He is a stigma related wide receiver. People don't like him. Billy and I don't like him. Maybe it's us. We just control the market. But I do think that there is not a wide enough market for his value to ever creep up to the places that you want it to, even with his output. That being said, this is a prime example of wanting to get in on still a scoring asset at a relatively tolerable cost when you're talking about going in at straight up David Njoku or Pop Douglas in the third. These are pretty palatable. And if you're not willing to kind of give up that type of value to get into an asset that historically scores points, I don't really know what to tell you, because we're talking about, 3 years in a row from 2021 to 2023, he was a top 20 wide receiver, touching over 100 wide receivers, 100 receptions, 100 receptions in almost all 3 years.
Touching
And
a lot of wide receivers. He might get a call
yeah.
from the authorities.
Yeah, rightfully so. But yeah, I think that's just kind of like where my head sits. Anything
No,
else you want to add there?
yeah, it's a good one. I think the only thing to add is that there was probably also some concerns that were quarterback related, but I do think Daniel Jones probably could have been in the quarterback section on this list. Granted, I don't think, he's going to be long-term value where it's at
Yeah.
now, but I think it's worth saying that for both Michael Pittman and his own Daniel Jones situation, like Daniel Jones was clearly, and this people can say this is hindsight 2020. I don't really think it is. I think he was clearly the best option to win the job in that room if we were honest with ourselves back then, and are like, yes, he had a falling out or whatever with New York, and he wasn't great there, but he certainly was better than any quarterback that they've ever had in that room, including anything we ever saw from Anthony Richardson. So it was really conceivable that worked out the way it did, and so I think being as concerned as we were for Michael Pittman and not knowing, but seeing like, yo, this guy's probably going to win the job. We should give a little bit more value to Daniel Jones as well, because there was one point where I'm sure he was QB 30 something or 40 something, you know what I mean? Where there was no value at all. Probably back in July or something like that, maybe even August. So it's, just worth mentioning coming out of that conversation.
That's a really good point. And yeah, I thought about adding either Daniel Jones or Sam Darnold to the conversation as two guys that were basically, completely thrown away in the market for the offseason and have done a great job going into the year. But yeah, the great points. The last one in the wide receivers before we really wrap this kind of section up, because the tight ends, unfortunately, are a little bit of just a quick shout. We got Xavier Worthy on August 1st, wide receiver 23. He's right now wide receiver 28. And the reason I have him here is really about his fantasy performance. I think he's actually been significantly underwhelming in terms of what we were expecting this season, given that Rashee Rice had a 6-game suspension. Yes, Worthy did get injured week 1. Yes, he did miss 2 weeks because of that, but he has since played 6 games. He has scored 17 points, 11 points, 11 points, 8 points, 10 points, and 6 points in those games. That's in a PPR format, 10 points per 1 point per 10 yards, 6 point per receiving touchdown. My brain's not working today. And, it really begs to question, like, what the fuck is up with Xavier Worthy? Is there anything to be concerned about? Is it a profile issue? Is it just how many options there are in that offense? Are you buying at wide receiver 28? Like, what are we doing here?
Not really. I don't think anybody's selling at wide receiver 28 necessarily. I think those totals that you mentioned are probably average enough for somebody to just, still believe. So I'm not sure if I'm really in on that, on that cost, though it's worth exploring. I just think that he's not as versatile as, people want him to be and as the team wants him to be. And I think you have Rice there, you have Kelsey there, you have some other guys who can get involved, right? And I just don't like when Rice was out, you saw him get more like short area targets, stuff like that, short area routes. But you're not seeing as much of that. And when they do try to do it, it hasn't been super successful. You know what I mean? And so he's not really that kind of player. Like, I don't think he's really a player who you give behind the line of scrimmage, short area, let him break tackles. Like, he's more Jameson Williams type, And so, it's just never going to be a fantasy asset I'm like super into it. And it doesn't necessarily surprise me, I guess, that this is kind of the performance. I think we expected for sure more. But the injury kind of kills the momentum, anything that he would have had. And then you get Rice coming back and he's just not the preferred target, man. Like, he's not really doing the things I think that Pat needs him to do and the team needs him to do to be a large part of a large part of the team. And I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it is going to happen anytime soon. And funny enough, like he's a great example of someone I would probably be willing to move out of to get into Michael Pittman, if that makes sense. Like I'd rather get into that like low floor of
Yeah.
the high teens, low 20s, and give up on the quote unquote dynasty value there. They're give or take around the same KTC rankings. And he just doesn't have really much to his game that I want to get into outside of the few boom games. And to your point, I think the correlation with JMO or Jameson Williams is actually really solid. I do think that Xavier Worthy probably provides a little bit more in a best ball format than he does in lineup. And that's going to be how I see him moving forward. So yeah, shout out to Billy.
Not only from a fantasy perspective, I also just think like they would get more out of them if they used him in the way they use Jameson Williams, whereas like get the ball in his hand while he's moving and like in a specific direction, and then he can kind of go. And I just don't see that happening that much. And so it almost seems like he's trying to do like more real wide receiver stuff where it's like just know what you are and do the stuff you're really good at. You know what I mean? And work on that other shit in the offseason and try it some other time, but like not right now. So yeah, we can move on though. Sorry.
Sweet. Yeah. Last but not least, I did want to just also bring up the tight ends. They've been a pretty precarious group. I think the love and infatuation of tight ends this year has been unlike any other. We have a lot of great breakout rookie tight ends. Shout out to Tyler Warren, Harold Fannin, Aronde Gadsden Jr. We just had our first breakout of Colston Loveland. There are just so many. Terrence Ferguson's caught a few touchdowns already this year. Elijah Arroyo caught a touchdown on Monday. I think that's when it was, or maybe it was Sunday night. I don't know. I've blacked out the week already. But all of this to say, from everything that I've looked at, I wanted to see if there was actual usage that was going up for tight ends. And that's why we're just seeing so much more quote unquote points or value kind of being fluctuated for tight ends. And the reality is no. The big change is that red zone targets have gone up and tight ends touchdowns have also gone up. And I do think that that's unfortunately changed a little bit of the perspective of how tight ends are doing. So when I think of guys like Kyle Pitts or Jake Ferguson, even Tyler Kraft, that's not his name, Tucker, he tore his ACL and I immediately forgot his name.
Done.
I immediately traded him. Anyway, that's another conversation for later. So I do think that like tight end performance isn't necessarily going in any particular direction, but I do think that they are now in the precipice of our view because I'm going to have that conversation really quickly. We are infatuated with the red zone. We are infatuated with this TV content that shows us scoring. We are infatuated with players and teams being in scoring positions. And I think, unfortunately, we see more tight end usage than ever before because that's the part of the field that we're watching primarily. Like I said before, based off a rolling 5-year average, we are not seeing an actual uptick in usage for tight ends. We're just seeing an uptick in touchdown performance. And so with that being said, there weren't really any tight ends I wanted to call out specifically because I don't think from a statistical perspective, they're really all that important or have done anything that is like all that interesting. The only one that was probably crossing that line for me was Tyler Warren. And I do think that over the last 3 weeks, we have really seen teams be able to scheme a way to shut him down in a pretty significant manner. And he's really coming back down to earth, I think, unfortunately. If you really want to listen to a good breakdown of Tyler Warren and his game, I highly recommend listening to, I believe it was this week or maybe last week's Feel It or Fuck It by Matt Wallman. It's a great little anecdote on kind of what he's seen about Tyler Warren and kind of the slow trickle effect of what his statistical output has looked like. With that being said, any additional ads there for tight end?
No, was not much, but was the rolling average that you looked at all tight ends or rookies?
It was all tight ends.
Because I would assume rookie tight end usage is up compared.
Correct. So it is.
That I didn't. Yeah.
And yes, and my issue with that is that specifically for Gadsden and Fannin, I did think that injuries played a part there that we can't really bake in as like a totality thing for me. So I just didn't want to include that as part of my analysis. But yeah, that's completely fair.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I think Gadsden, I could be wrong. I thought he had some injury stuff happening early in the season that may have prevented him from really getting in there. I don't think the guys around him were really preventing Gadsden from getting in there. I think there
That's
was
weird.
like they were all kind of injured if I remember correctly, and I know Will Disley or whoever the other guy was came back
Tyler
like
Conklin.
early. Tyler, yeah, somebody in there, and then Gadsden, but
He's
neither
great.
here nor there. Yeah, neither here nor there. I think in general, yeah, I don't have anything really to say in regard to this specific conversation we're having on the tight ends.
Great. Yeah, I think that's basically it. It really is almost like a report card for us to kind of go through our own misses that happened this off season, because there were quite a bit. And yeah, I hope that was valuable to you guys.
I mean, I think it's a really great conversation, and also just like there's certain things for myself, so I'm sure listeners can take similar takeaways from this, but certain things for myself that I can definitely do better in the future in terms of like how we're viewing these players, in August or in rookie draft season, whatever the kind of the point that we're checkpoint that we're looking at. I think we can do a better job of either being aggressive or being more patient depending on the situation, and attacking things just differently. And it's a good it's always good to look back and kind of self-evaluate. So good stuff, Jake. Thank you for that one. We're going to hop into another one here. Try not to take too much time on this one, but I call it throwing in the towel. I have had probably 3 or 4 teams where they look pretty good from a record standpoint, but something's just not quite adding up. The total points or the points against are like, you're in first points against, but you're, way down in points for. So you're just been getting lucky pretty much, and you just have a good record. And really what I'm thinking here is, there is a time I think to eventually just be like, look, this is not working out. And like, I got to completely take this apart. But, I'm thinking about contenders that look like they're winning, realizing it's really not there and kind of breaking it down even while you're winning. And what that looks like does that just mean you throw it all away and you completely rebuild? Now you're in a 3-year rebuild, or can you retool, or are there other things to do? Like, what can you do from this position, especially if maybe not everybody is aware that you are kind of a fraud, or, you're just not really one of the true contenders in this league. So really quickly here, I'm going to run through just a couple different sections, and maybe I'll just pause on each of them and get Jake's thoughts as we go through. And then I'll give some just live examples of a couple teams that look like this and kind of what maybe those roster constructions look like to me. So real quick here, I wanted to break down just the different elements of this. I think like the common signs that you might be one of these teams, that you might be a fraud technically. And so what I already mentioned, right? You're overperforming versus league mates or versus expectations, technically. So, your total points don't really match the record, as I kind of mentioned before, or you're relying on aging transitory producers, which we've talked about quite a bit over the last few weeks. So, you're relying on guys like Kamani Vidal and a whole bunch of those guys, right? Stuff like that. And then you have multiple 1-year assets, which are sometimes similar assets, but assets who are just not going to have long-term value. So is there any additional points that you can add there, or any feedback you want to give on, the signs that you might just be a fraud?
No, I think you basically shouted out the main ones. The only other aspect to the fraudism is the like total number of contending teams and how you will like bake that in as well. So what that means is more so if there's, let's say, 6 or 7 teams that are built to contend this year and your team 8, what does that actually look like in the construct of that dichotomy or the relationship of what you're having with the rest of the league. Is there a way for you to be able to make the first move out of the fraudism and throw the towel in maybe even earlier to best benefit maybe getting back a pick that you sent a prior year away or something along those lines? That'd be the only other thing that I'd add is just like the number of teams that you're contending with, because sometimes there will also be multiple frauds with you where you can, push towards contending maybe even further into that season and know that you have the ability to kind of push past them, push yourself into maybe a 4th or 3rd seed. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I do think that I may have put it in one of these sections, but I do think moving early before everybody else is an advantage of identifying that you're in this position, right? You identify this and then you can say, okay, like I know everybody's going to be selling at some point, but let me get out and get the premium assets back in return that are out there, right? Maybe like Jake said, you can also attack your first because people think that you're going to be later, but based on your max points for that your pick is going to be much higher than people are expecting. So let me go ahead and get that early for these, it wouldn't be a commodity doll that early, but stuff like that, those kind of guys, right? Like, let me package a couple of these, maybe with one guy who is a little bit more sustainable, and boom, now you're kind of in, in the position you want to be in. So, okay, so if you're a paper tiger, if you're really not, not one of the true contenders, what can you do from that advantage? So I think one thing, and again, this kind of goes into the psychology of things, goes into what we've been talking about a little bit here, but you're not really viewed as desperate to buy or sell, right? Like teams aren't looking at you when you're out there buying and selling like, oh, this guy's really got to get out of players, or he's really got to get in on players because he's the number one team in the league. You're probably not if you're in this position, but somebody thinks those kind of things. They're not going to think that about you. That you're not really desperate yet. So if you're doing this early enough, you can, I think, just get in without the stink on you and not really have people, trying to decipher what you're doing as much. Also, I think from this, you can demand premium prices for contending assets. Like, you can kind of be like, I don't really need to sell this stuff. So like, if you really want this, I mean, I'll hold on to it and keep contending, but I'm just kind of seeing what the prices are out there. If you're willing to get in on this price, let's do it, so you can kind of attack things from that advantage. And then again, I think you should be thinking of this as strategic liquidation. That's kind of like what you should be viewing this as. Not really like you're on a fire sale here. You're not just like selling everything off, but you're liquidating things, with purpose and trying to either become more efficient, optimized, or just kind of gear up for maybe next year. You're not rebuilding completely, you're retooling, right? And you maybe even be able to continue to contend this year, even if you do this the right way, which kind of gets into the next section here. But Jake, any thoughts here before I move into this next section?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add here is that I love the idea of the strategic liquidation. This is a prime example of when I would be going into elite assets that other teams probably think that I'm trying to contend with, but really I'm trying to get off of older assets. And there's a there was a trade that we talked about pretty at length, so I won't bring it up again. But basically, Billy was able to get into Lamar Jackson for a bunch of older assets, and like that is a type of move that I think to the rest of the league doesn't necessarily scream like he's no longer contending this year because he got into Lamar Jackson, who's going to probably finish out the year at somewhere between 26 to 31 points per game. Like that doesn't say to the rest of the league, oh, that guy is giving up on his season, right? But instead, what that does is now add potential question marks to the build. When you have question marks, I do think that you have a little bit more strength to say in your trade negotiations, you have no idea what I'm trying to do. And I talk about this very, very frequently. That's exactly what you have to do is you just keep trading into those types of places. So you break down your team that maybe had 15 available starters, now down to 12 available starters. Like, so what? Maybe you compete for another 2 weeks and then you show a little bit more of your cards by trading away another starter for a couple of picks or something like that. Like that's the type of movement that you should be doing to make it your advantage rather than the rest of the league's advantage.
Yeah, and I had Jaden Daniels go down this week in that league, and I think I think he would. Well, my point being is like if he, had a decent game, I might have actually won that matchup anyway and continued to have this
Yeah.
cloak around me a little bit. You know what I mean? And now I think this, people kind of see what's going on, and I do have some assets that I could get out from still. And maybe they don't all see that I'm kind of faltering here, but that was just one of those teams where I'm like, okay, well, I can become more efficient and it can also be a retooling, right? Like it's kind of both things. Like
Yep.
Lamar Jackson's going to cover most of the points that I would need, from the assets I moved on from long term. And over time, I'm hoping that I can, kind of add the pieces from my picks or whatever it is, and again retool. And I think that's actually a really good roster that has a lot of solid pieces, but like James Cooks, Mark Andrews, Chase Brown, a lot of pieces that I think I could move from this position and get assets that may also score similar points soon, be younger, or get into picks, whatever it may be, and kind of just like reset this thing within a year or so. So that was definitely one live example that Jake just brought up that I think fits kind of this profile of throwing in the towel per se, or trying to find a way where it's like, yeah, my main goal isn't necessarily winning a championship anymore, though it could still happen, but I need to make some other things happen at this point. You know what I mean? And if I still make the playoffs, great. If I don't, I'm going to make this team more efficient for the future. And so that should be kind of the idea here. Okay, so moving into this next section, like breaking it down, actually breaking the team down. So I do think from the position of, being a contender that you have realized like, hey, I need to kind of move in a different direction or make this better in some form or fashion. I think you can move those aging producers for youth and usable assets. I think that's one thing you can do. Like you can try to get into some of these rookies, like a Kyle Monungai, right? A couple weeks ago, you could have traded some of these older guys for that kind of player plus something. And now, you're younger, you have the extra assets, and you're still competing. So it's like, I just think that there's ways to do this without completely blowing things up. Attempting to make deals that allow you to continue contending but reset the window. That's really what we're talking about here. And then target injured, underperforming players like Brandon Ayuk, Jaden Reeds, Jaden Daniels, Henderson, right? Travion Henderson. We've talked a lot about him the last couple of weeks. But I think if you target those players in these situations, it really benefits you. I have a trade for Ayuk that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Maybe we'll just talk about it towards the end of this segment here, because I think it really fits what I'm talking about with some of these contenders that are kind of paper tigers. So any thoughts about kind of breaking it down there, Jake?
No. I think honestly, it's on my bad. I should have read the next piece ahead of time. I think this is like a perfect transition of what I was talking about before into really breaking down the roster and getting into the right assets for where you need to be. And, targeting injured and underperforming players really aligns well to our conversation a few weeks back about when to get into quarterbacks as well. I think the best ways to build these paper tigers is also by acquiring elite assets that are injured. I think a lot of people question why
Malik
is
Neighbors,
this why is this guy getting into Malik Neighbors when they're contending? Why they just get off of Rome Odunze and a first for Neighbors when Odunze is giving them points now, or Rashi Rice and a second for Neighbors when he's giving them points now? Like, what is the process of that? Like, that doesn't make sense to me, right? Like, that's your intent every time that you do anything in a public fashion in your leagues should always be that. And so when you break it down, make sure that the intent is not actually present, or else I think it doesn't really help your team that much, especially during these weird windows of kind of fluctuation of what your image is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great feedback. Great feedback. Okay, so a couple quick ones here to finish this off. So messaging, I think just, how you're kind of interacting with the league. You don't want to broadcast you're a seller quite yet. I think you want to just make moves in the shadows as much as possible, and not just like come in the league chat and be like, hey, I'm moving guys, like I'm trying to look to next year, or whatever your actual thoughts are. I don't think it's necessarily a benefit if you're actually winning at the same time, because you can really, kind of fly under the radar, make some moves before people understand what's happening, attack some of those picks that people don't really know where they're going to be at yet, but you're looking at both your max points for, other people's max points for, or however the standings are kind of set for your draft order. You're looking at those things and saying, oh, okay, I can manipulate this a little bit right now. I think that's, you want to keep that, that aspect of this kind of, in the picture. Then frame moves is gearing up for next year's push. Instead, when you are having to kind of, when somebody, you inevitably you'll make a trade with somebody and they're like, hey, so I don't get it. Like, are you trying to like contend? Or are you trying to rebuild? Like, what are you doing? You're like, look, I think this team has the juice or is close, but not really that close. I'm just trying to, make things happen for next year or whatever it is. Don't, if you are really trying to continue, doing stuff or continue contending this year, or if your idea is like, you just want to break this down, I think either way, that's a good way to just kind of keep the conversation really neutral, you know what I mean, without them understanding exactly what's happening. So that was just a thought I had there. Last thing I'll say here is when do you truly throw in the towel, right? I think most of the time for me, it's when like just too many injuries hit. I mean, if your team's just dog shit and you didn't pick that up early in the season, I mean, that's a different story. But most of the times when things really go south is either you are an aging team and just nobody's performing. That's one. But I think most of the time it's when the injuries really hit. And so I think, again, like we talked about before, I think you want to sell and get into the market before everyone else does in these situations. And I think that's going to be, your best friend is kind of just getting in early. And then be honest with yourself. Like, just know, like, is this a team that's not going to do it? Don't sit there and be like, yeah, this team can definitely win. Like, if it just gets to the playoffs, it's like, yeah, like, anything can happen, but look at your team, right? Like, let me just throw really quickly an example out here of one of these. So I have a couple Devi teams, but Devi doesn't really matter in this, but these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 starters. So it's pretty deep starting rosters. And then, I have one that was last week 5-3, decent record, right? Not bad, but this team is made up of Brian Robinson's, Jeremy Nichols, Zacchaeus's. Right now, I have like the Puka Nacua, the AJ Brown. I do have, I think, Jamar Chase maybe on this team. So some really stud assets. But when you're starting Brashad Smith regularly, Sterling Shepard regularly, right? Like, it's just not going to work that way. Okay. And I think I had Alvin Kamara on this team too last week. And what I ended up doing, just as an example, this team is pretty thin. So a guy like Alvin Kamara seemingly adds value, right? It's like, this guy is going to offer me 10 points or so. I need him in the lineup, whatever it is. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, this ain't really going to work out. Like, I think, let me look. I'm first in points against, fifth in points for. So I'm not like the worst scoring, but I know that I'm benefiting from a pretty easy schedule, And so what I did was somebody actually came into the chat and was like, I'm buying points, essentially, is what they were saying. And I'm like, all right, this was last week before, Kamara had like 0 points this week or whatever it was. So I'm like, all right, you need points. You have Brandon Ayuk. Let me sell you Kamara and Kendrick Bourne for Brandon Ayuk. And I didn't even see it get accepted, but it got accepted. And I ended up not having a running back in that spot, which wouldn't have mattered. I lost by a lot of points. But point is I think that was a really heady move for this kind of team for two reasons. Number one, I really don't think it's going to happen. So I'm kind of retooling and, it's kind of like under the radar. It's Alvin Kamara. Nobody's really going to notice this deal that much. Brandon Ayuk's not going to all of a sudden come back and perform this week or anything like that. But he could come back and perform later on this year. Like, is it likely? No. Could it happen? Probably the same kind of points that Alvin Kamara is offering you the rest of the season, somewhere between 0, right, and maybe 10 or something like that. And maybe he has more upside, but he certainly has more future upside. And this team that I just mentioned to you obviously has some really great core assets in terms of like a Jamar Chase and some long-standing assets. So if I retool it, maybe it's not this year, maybe it's next year where it kind of really gets back into form. But that's kind of what I'm thinking, is like going after deals like that, obviously hitting on what we talked about, breaking it down in terms of targeting injured or underperforming players. That's kind of the one I used here, but just a live example of one that I really don't see it. And honestly, this 2 leagues are run by the same person. And this is the last thing I'll say here. Very similar structure, same structure in terms of the starting lineup and everything. I have some better assets on this other one, but I'm 7-2, points for 6, points against 12th. So I have a pretty tough schedule, but I'm just like this one. I'm willing to ride out more, but I think it deserves a little bit more retooling for like this year and seeing how I can make some of those moves for not the Brandon Ayuks, but maybe some other players to like optimize the team. But they're just two of the teams that I've really looked at, and I'm like, man, this is just man, they're not really the actual contenders in this league, and I think I need to look at some moves that can either make it that or I can kind of throw in the towel and retool maybe for next year. So that was the idea of that section. Any thoughts, Jake, before we move on to the trades? I know I kind of just went on for a long time.
No, you're good. The only thing I wanted to add was in the messaging section, you talked a lot about framing moves as gearing up for next year's push and also like not broadcasting what you're trying to do as a seller. One of the things that I like to do, and it's just a fun little tidbit, is I intentionally send certain types of offers to certain types of other managers. So I never want those other managers to know exactly like what my intent is. And more often than not, funny enough, I try and I go in the opposite direction of like what sounds most intuitive. So instead of going after the rebuilders for better assets to let them know that I'm like going after elite prospects or whatever, I instead go and try and trade what I think are like over the market younger assets to the rebuilders. And I try to go after basically depreciating younger assets or very, very old assets from the contenders who want to potentially shed those types of assets off their team because they're at like a particular high level. And I do find that usually will work. It's just really about finding the right windows. We're just about to get into that next window where I don't think that that's going to be very productive. So what that really means is checking the time of the year when you're making these trades. You're less likely to be able to get into, for instance, like CMC for a first right now from a fellow contender, but maybe back in week 4 or 5 when you were 4-1 and they're 3-2, or they're 2-3 and now they're 6-3. It's a very different perspective, right? So that's kind of the way that you have to kind of interact with your league when you're really that paper tiger, because it is all about kind of not showing what your colors might be at any given time. Because also now CMC's value has increased again. And this would be a prime example of when, even as a contender, even as like a 2 seed, I'd probably look to shed CMC and find those points somewhere else going into next year. And that's just the way that I build. I don't think that's very common. I don't think that's a very standard approach. And I think a lot of people would probably say it's really fucking dumb, right? Like, why are you removing points from your team just for dynasty value? Dynasty value is not going to do shit for you, leave your name up in the rafters or whatever the fuck people say. Rafters. That's what it is. Not raptors like a dinosaur. And I also agree with that line of logic too. It's just, I'm very much in the game of like trying to go counterintuitive so that others don't really know what I'm doing. And I think that that's a really good piece to try and approach when you are making trade offers to others. Almost make them question, like, what is the intent here? Like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why are you trying to benefit my team in that particular way or this way? And why are you buying in now when you should have bought in 3 weeks ago? Those types of things.
Definitely. It's great feedback, man. Great feedback. Okay. Well, I thought that was a good conversation. Again, I think that we far too often just go head first when we aren't actually contenders. And there's a lot, as we just went through, that you can do from that advantage when people aren't really paying attention to that as well, right? And you obviously can do a lot of things if you can kind of pinpoint where others are at within that hierarchy as well. But yeah, if you can do that for yourself, identify those teams, I think you can make quicker headway to getting back to where you want to. If you kind of notice it before everybody else does and kind of, act on it earlier. And so, this may not be as actionable this season. I think there's probably still some teams you could do it with from here. As I just talked about, I have a couple teams that are, 7-1, 5-4 or whatever, that I think I could still work from that position. But it's probably a little bit better suited knowing in week like 5 to 6 and working from there. So definitely something to keep in mind for the future as well as now. Okay, good stuff. Let's knock out 5 or 6 trades here. One we already talked about, so we can remove the Kamara one. Okay, let's hop into trades and non-trades here. Cool. First one here is League of Legends, I think it is. This is our League of Legends
Yes.
Dynasty League. Okay, and this is Dylan Sampson plus Kyle Monungai for a 27 second and a 27 third. Oh, man. That's tough. I feel like I don't know when this trade happened.
It
I
happened
feel
on
like
Halloween, so Friday night.
okay. So right before this weekend. Got it. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I think you can get out of Monungai for almost double that at this point. So I think I would have said this on Friday too, is I like the Monungai side here. I understand getting out for the 27 second and third. I do. But it just feels like we can get out for more now. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Jake?
Yeah, this is one of those where I wanted to actually break this down a little bit. Shout out Uriah. Uriah is the one who traded away Monangai and Dylan Sampson for the second and third. Uriah, 6 weeks prior, traded Billy, actually. Caleb Johnson, Kyle Monangai, and a 26 second for Travion Henderson, or I should say the other way around. Billy traded
I traded that for
those
Henderson.
pieces for Travion Henderson. My apologies. And what I wanted to shout out was like, this is kind of what I would do with Kyle Monungai. I think that this is a really great way of taking Monungai as probably a throw-in in this trade, taking him, turning him into another second. And, now Travion Henderson looks like he is equivalent to 2 seconds plus Caleb Johnson, and it looks way more palatable. Yeah, he probably loses some value here. This is probably a 2 seconds worthy trade post this weekend, and it probably stings a little bit, but that probably balances out this offseason, and it probably becomes to a second and a third again or something along those lines. Maybe Monangai wins the starting role for next year. Maybe he doesn't. Like, it's just too up in the air. So this is a totally fine move. And unfortunately for Uriah, his build there is probably going to be in a rebuild for at least another season. So like, I'm all for trying to maximize off of, this. In this situation, it was DeAndre Swift wasn't going to start, sell off that hype. And he did. And unfortunately, Monangai tore it up, but he also played against the Cincinnati Bengals, who happen to have the worst rush defense in the NFL. So it's a good indictment on Monangai that he performed well against a bad rush defense. Like, it could have gone really poorly, could have had a terrible week. But yeah, I agree with Billy. It's probably a little too soon, but I'm not upset about that return.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lengthy conversation about this a week or two ago. I feel like talking about like the Buckies and all those guys, and I think we do tend to be willing to get out of these guys early, and I do think like on a whole process is like good process, but yeah, it just felt like I mean, again, you can't kill him for this. Like you said, long term, this probably evens out back to this anyway. So. Yeah, I can't kill him too much for that. It's a solid deal. Okay. Real quick here in the comments on YouTube, I need a wide receiver 3 behind CD and Olave. Would y'all send a second for Shakur? Yeah, sure. Hope it's late. See if you can get like a third or a fourth back with Shakur. Would be nice. Probably not getting a third back, but a second for Shakur and a fourth. Like, I'm not going to hate on that, I guess, if you really, really need it. Jake?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Fine. I think you could do a little bit more with the second. I think you could be a little bit more creative. There's probably a way to maybe get into Devontae Adams in the next couple of weeks if there's a down week again. There's like, you are wanting to get into assets, in my opinion, at this point in time, especially because it sounds like you're trying to compete. That Shakir is just not the type of asset that I really want. So, yeah, I'm fine with it as a stopgap, but it's just not the contending piece that I think I'd want, is all.
That makes sense. Yeah. Wonder if you can get into like a Mike Evans for nothing.
Definitely.
For
but
like maybe
I don't think he's going to be back. He's not going to be back for playoffs.
No?
For NFL playoffs.
I'm sorry. He got the clavicle. What am I talking about? Oh my goodness. Yeah. I forgot about the clavicle. I don't know why.
The clavicle.
Never mind that. Yeah, what Jake said for sure. Okay. DU2 here. We have Terry McLaurin plus Javonte Williams for a 26 first and a 26 fourth. seems a little light to me on the pick side, but to me, I feel like this should be like at least a 26 first and a 26 second.
Mm-hmm.
But like long term, you're probably not getting that, for these
Yeah.
guys. So I'm not mad at it. Like I understand going the pick side of this.
Yeah, I agree. I think the player side has technically more value. I think this is like one of those trades that it made a lot of sense in the landscape of the league. The team trading away McLaurin and Javante is actually a quote unquote contender. They were
Mm-hmm.
trading the players away to a middling team that probably doesn't have that high of a chance of competing this year. And they had just too many startable assets. I think this made their job a little bit easier. They kept their higher end assets and they got out of middling assets for a relatively good return. I think it makes sense on both sides. Personally, like if I'm the one acquiring the picks, I think I would probably just try and push for a little bit more. I think there's probably a way that
Mm-hmm.
you get into this with, even if it's like 2/3 or something like that. Just feels like Javante, like we were talking about, is going for a first right now, and getting McLaurin for 2/3. Yeah, you're underselling, but at least it's just a little bit more value.
Yeah, I agree with you on the value side of things there for sure. Good way to optimize a contending team for the future, though, to be honest with you. I
Yeah.
like doing that when I have too many assets or enough assets and I can go get a first. I've done that on a couple contenders, and it's really nice. All of a sudden, you're like, this team's competitive, and I have 227 first. You're like, how the hell? It's a great feeling. Okay, DU2, another trade. We have Kamani Vidal, Amarian Hampton for Quentin Johnston, Marvin Harrison Jr., 26 third, 27 third. Yeah, this is a fun trade for sure. Man, that's a tough one. I mean I lean the Marv side, but I can understand somebody going the Hampton side. I'll lean the Marv side. I think there's enough assets there where Marv, Hampton are going to be similar for the long haul, and then I think you can do more with QJ in those thirds. That's just how I feel.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do think that realistically over their careers, Hampton will probably, as much as I hate to say it, have higher upside and higher dynasty value in certain windows. And getting that side for basically a couple of like throw-in pieces. And I maybe that's unfair to QJ, but like we've already seen QJ lose his role that he had earlier in the year once he got injured. He's just too volatile of an asset for me, and so like he really is throw-in value at this point in time. But yeah, I think it's a totally fair trade. I think I'd just probably lean on the Hampton side, just knowing that the ceiling value there is probably going to be a little bit higher.
Fair enough. All right, real quick here. Comments. We got AJ in YouTube comments. I've got Jaden Daniels on a contender, and I just got offered my Jaden Daniels 27 first and third for Jalen Hurts, Ertz, and Fant.
That's crazy. No.
I mean, I wouldn't do that.
No, it's a terrible offer.
Yeah, I would think that you can find another way to continue contending than doing this.
Use the first and add points in another facet. Check your scoring settings and see if you even need a quarterback. If you have potentially two high-end scoring quarterback assets on your team, which you should have. And if you don't, maybe there's a way to get into, I don't know, Sam Darnold for like 2 seconds to replace some of those points and get into a wide receiver with the first. Like, there's just got to be some other way. And I'm just not a big fan of throwing a first off of an asset that should be equitable or slightly above value of Jalen Hurts just because he dislocated his non-throwing elbow, right? Like that's just, if this was like a serious throwing shoulder injury or something along those lines, I would be like, yeah, do it. But no, I think there's other ways that you should be trying to retool this roster than throwing first on top of elite assets to get into another high-end asset.
It says
Great
I've got
offer by the other
Mariota.
guy.
Says I've got Mariota and Gino there. I'm just gonna ride probably. Like if like I'm not spending, definitely not doing that deal. If you want to go seek out other options, I'd probably just try to tier up from those, to be honest. Add your first to those and tier up or something. Don't do whatever that offer was. Which I mean is tiering. No, it is technically trying to like tier up is what they're saying, but it's not. I mean, it's do that from Gino, not from Jaden Daniels, But all right, real quick here, we're gonna just hit one more of these trades because I do have to get out of here and help put my kid down. So we're going to actually hit the DU3 trade real quick. This is Jake's. This is Tucker Kraft for Colston Loveland, Taj Brooks, and 227 thirds. I'll just give my quick feedback here. I just personally, this is post-injury for Kraft. I don't understand why we need to add on to healthy first-round pick Colston Loveland to get Kraft. Like I feel like it should really be the other way when the other guy has a torn ACL. Like I not that he can't come back from it. I mean, if you want to say that Kraft is the better player asset, I'm not going to hold you on that. But like, is like after you saw what Colston Loveland can do, you just saw the breakout and the upside. I don't, it just doesn't feel like that's necessary. So that's just my thoughts on it. Jake, you got the Colston Loveland side, so I doubt you disagree too much with me. But any thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, I would just say that I think market sentiment is really high on Tucker Kraft, and I think he performed really well this year. I think he's definitely an asset that I would be trying to get into as well. I think he's the prime example of what we were talking about before. If I'm on a contender, if I can find a cheap way to get into Tucker Kraft, I would do the same thing. But Colston Loveland is just a profile that I personally really like. I think he actually performed outside of his fantasy ability. I thought he performed relatively well this past weekend. It did help that Cole Kmet did get injured. I think he got a concussion and he's in concussion protocol right now. But all that being said, this just seemed like a good way for me to get back into similar-ish potential scoring for tight end. While this team, I think I have like 7 or 8 startable tight ends. Like it's kind of ridiculous on this build. And it was just like another way to add a little bit more depth and also add a little bit younger talent. And I actually just acquired Tucker Kraft this week, which made it even sadder that he ended up getting injured. So it was a way for me to kind of like cycle out some of that value without me having to wait too long, because I do think that I want to contend on this build.
Awesome. Good breakdown. I do think that Tucker Kraft is somebody we should buy into. I just don't think this is how you buy into those assets. Like, I don't want to give up a premium asset to get into this guy and add on to that premium asset, or a premium type asset, potential asset, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that to get into an injured one. I want to sell stuff that I don't want as much for the injured guy when his value inevitably kind of, decreases. So yeah, AJ sucks when the new toy breaks. That is true. All right, I got to get out of here. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for everybody hopping in the YouTube comments. It really elevates the show. Love talking to you guys. Hop into the Discord. It's in our description here. It's in the description of the podcast. So find us. Other than that, Jake, thanks for being here as always. And find us at Dynasty Underdog on the socials. Peace out otherwise.
Peace.
Later.